Hello, it's John Heaton, and today I'm going to be looking at a very luxurious book which I got sent in the post from the Lennon estate, from Simon Hilton. Thank you, Simon. Beautiful Thames and Hudson hardback John and Yoko Mind Games book, full of lavish photographs and interesting articles. And my first reaction was just, is this going to add anything to the book that we got in the box set, the CD box set? But I'm glad to say there's a lot of stuff in here which wasn't in that book. There's less information on, for example, the lineups for the various songs on the album, more discussion about the period, the context in which the album was made. And I think that's the beauty of this book, because it basically covers the period more or less from when they arrived in New York in September 71 to the release of this album. So when they first moved to New York, they lived in a hotel, and then they quickly moved to the very small flat in the village, Greenwich Village, called 105 Bank Street. And I've been there with my kids in 2016. And apart from walking a country mile to get there, when you get there, it's absolutely sort of unremarkable as a house, as a flat, and pretty tiny. I don't think they even owned the whole upstairs and downstairs. I think the neighbours owned the yard, and they had to. I think they owned the upstairs apartment, if I'm right in saying. It was pretty tiny, and events sort of centred around their bedroom. And whenever guests came round, they entertained them in there. And I think sort of Jerry Rubin, Abby Hoffman, Keith Richards, Paul and Linda McCartney came here in December '71. Anyway, I just thought it was interesting that John and Yoko should move from a huge mansion in Ascot, Tittenhurst Park, to a very small sort of down-to-earth flat in the village where there was no security. And if you go there, when we went there was no plaque on the wall saying John Lennon lived here, no sense of security. And one of the reasons they eventually moved out and went to the Dakota was because every time they opened the front door there was some weirdo. So they got fed up with that, so they moved to the Dakota. Anyway, I just wanted to sort of give some context, because that's what this book does. Actually, a lot of the material in this book perhaps was intended for the Sometime in New York City archive edition, which, as we know, didn't happen, and it was shelved. So they probably they made the sensible decision, in my opinion, to combine that material with the Mind Games period to sort of form one kind of period of the New York period up to and including Mind Games. I think it works well as a concept, because you get articles about feminism. Yoko's writing the feminization of society in February '72. You've got an article from her in March '72 entitled Sometime in New York City. You've got a whole section on when they moved to the Dakota and how they labelled every room with a name and put a gold plaque on the door. That's very interesting. And it's chock-a-block full of great pictures, and I'm going to show you a few, some of which will be familiar. This is John and Yoko walking down Central Park West towards the Dakota in April '73, just about to have their first viewing of the Dakota, and they obviously fell in love with it and decided to take it. This is some artwork which the music press was used for the music press. I've seen it in the NME, Melody Maker in the UK. Perhaps I'm not sure about the US, but yeah, that's a nice design. And good to have this in kind of full scale, because the CD box set was a bit smaller, so this is all together but a bit more satisfying. A true coffee table book. This is a selection of items from John and Yoko's esoteric literature library. Very interesting. You've got a section on tarot cards. You've got John and Yoko strolling through the village here in October '72, and it is quite heartwarming to think that they're no longer living in the ivory tower. They're living very close to the people, and they just wandered around more or less inconspicuously the village, and didn't get bothered too much on the whole. I think towards the end, when people sussed out that they were living there, maybe they got bothered a bit more, but they were walking around and cycling around the village, trying to shake our image. We found that we'd left it back in London, as the song goes, New York City. That's another shot of them shopping in Greenwich Village. Very nice. So we've got all the songs from Mind Games discussed, of course. Now, this is a very interesting section of the book. This is some sunset pictures taken on the pier near Bank Street on the Hudson River, and it's the night. Although this picture was incorrectly, this session of photographs was incorrectly attributed to 1973 in the 2002 CD of Mind Games. Bob Gruen, who took the picture, is talking about this session in quite a lot of detail, and I wanted to read some of it to you. So he says, the Nixon administration issued a deportation order to try and throw John out of the country. This was because of his drugs conviction in UK in 68, by the way. And then Nixon was elected, and that night particularly was pretty ugly. Yoko continues. The night McGovern lost the election in 72, McGovern was the Democrat, by the way, John and I were invited to a party at Jerry Rubin's apartment in the Village. It was a gathering of New York liberal intellectuals, some artists, musicians, and many journalists. John became totally drunk and pulled a woman into the next room and started to make love. Nobody could leave the party because all the coats were in that room. We were all sitting there trying to ignore what was happening. The wall was paper thin, and you could hear the noise, which was incredibly loud. A considerate musician put on a Dylan record to offset the sound, but that did not drown out the sound coming from that room. In the middle of all this, a New York celeb woman chose to make conversation with me. I don't know how you feel about him, but we love him. He and his friend, what they did, but especially John. We respect him tremendously. He's a great man. He's a wonderful man. It was something like that, and she kept repeating to me with an angry look as if to blame me for not rejoicing for what was happening in that room. Then there was a long silence. Some woman went quietly in to collect her coat. Others followed. John came out. He said he'd never seen me looking so pale. Well, I'm not surprised. And then Bob Gruen says the next day they all recovered from a huge hangover and they went to the studio for a few hours and then went down to this place by the river and had pictures taken. And Bob says, coming back, we were taking some pictures. There's one where John's on his knees, kind of asking for forgiveness. She was still dealing with him. She knew what he did, but it wasn't okay. You know, it's just not okay to do that. And he knew it, and he was sorry about it. So this is a picture of John on his knees. So we now know that this picture was taken the day after Nixon won the election. Yoko says, something was lost that night for me. Living with John was a very trying situation, but I thought I would endure all that for our love. I used to think that our love was a secret thing between us, so it didn't matter what people said, let them. Our love was higher than the highest sky and deeper than the deepest water. But was it? Now it seemed that there were some clouds I hadn't noticed, and the water looked murky after the splash. Jerry Rubin thought it was terrible that I couldn't forgive John. And she goes on to say, well, it's more not a question of forgiving, it's more like I can't forget what happened. Call me a prude, but it just hit me in the wrong way. Inside I felt like a shattered, raggedy doll. I just wanted to give full weight to that story. I think it's more or less the first time it's been told in that detail, and Bob Gruen's and Yoko are the best people to describe that with John being gone. And, you know, Yoko's often painted as the villain, so I just wanted to say, obviously, John was not a saint and he did a pretty terrible thing, and it's probably the single biggest reason why they separated in late 73 for 18 months, as we know. Now, this is a picture of the Dakota. This is Yoko sitting by the window. I just wanted to point out the record collection on the floor. If this is how they treated records, that's pretty shocking, because none of them are in their sleeves. I'll give them the benefit of the doubt, saying they were just moving in and everything was in boxes, perhaps, but I thought that was quite amusing. And then this is a very historic picture, because this is John in Los Angeles recording the Ringo album. Top picture of John, but bottom picture, Richard Perry, the producer in the loud blue sweater, talking to John. If you notice, behind John is Ringo, and the bottom right-hand corner is George Harrison. So this is the first picture post-split of three Beatles together in one shot. I always used to think it was Eric Clapton's wedding in 1979, where Paul, George and Ringo were photographed with Lonnie Donegan, and then later on in April 81 with Ringo's wedding, but this predates that. And there's a very amusing letter written by John to Newsweek after Newsweek had written this sensationalist article saying the Beatles are getting back together because of the Ringo sessions. And it's full of wit and humour, and the letter finishes, if only everything were as simple as unaffected as McCartney's new single, My Love, then maybe Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis would be reunited with the Marx Brothers and Newsweek could get a job, said an East African official. That's typical Lennon humour. This is another good story. There's a couple of fans outside Record Plant waited for him every day. John referred to them as the greeting committee, so they went and got him a T-shirt, which he turned up the next day wearing. So they snapped the picture. Very nice story there. John always considerate to the fans, from what I can see. The picture of the musicians from Mind Games. This picture was in the CD book as well. Great band: Gordon Edwards, Ken Asher, Jim Keltner, Sneaky Pete, Rick Marotta. Who did I leave out? Dave Spinoza, of course. So yeah, that's that. And then more pictures of the band. I don't think these pictures were in the CD book, actually. Nice pictures of the band there. And they all talk very affectionately about these sessions in both books, actually. This is the original picture which inspired the cover from a 1972 book which John and Yoko had. The Elliot Mintz interview is here in full. We've got some of the labels obviously used to promote the album, and the single are in here. I mentioned some of the articles. We've got input from John Hendricks, who was their PA in New York City. I never really knew about him. I was aware of Anthony Fawcett and Fred Seaman later, but John Hendricks, no. So it's good to see him contributing belatedly in this book. Record plant engineers, Roy, sorry if I pronounced your name wrong, Sisala or Kikala, and Jimmy Iovine or Iovine, Dan Barbiero. All three of them engineers, tremendous recollections of their time on these sessions, very appreciative of their time that they spent with John, and that goes for the musicians as well. They're all sort of glowing in their reminiscing on the making of this album. So this book covers, as I say, sort of the anti-war demonstrations, and obviously at 72 they got quite political, almost sort of political activists, but not quite, and they sort of pulled back because they realised they were being taken advantage of, because they said all these people shouting about revolution, but there were never any women, there was always just men, and John and Yoko thought that was a bit strange, so they sort of pulled back, and by the time of Mind Games, they were just promoting feminism and sort of, equal rights for women, more, and stepping back from the political stuff, and certainly never favouring violence, a violent revolution like Jerry Rubin and co had done. The section on Meat City is a very interesting collection of John Lennon quotes over the years about living in New York. It's fun to sort of spot where the quotes come from. Some of them from Playboy, 1980. Some of them from Andy Peebles, 1980, and other quotes in the book are from David Wigg, 69. The Maharishi even gets a page to describe his philosophy in the spirit of, everything goes for this Mind Games. So open your mind and explore the different possibilities of everything. No one is shut out. Everyone's given an input into this book. The immigration battle is obviously covered. The custody battle for Kyoko. Torrid time for the Lennons, and they could have gone under, but they didn't. They kept each other going more or less, but as I say, because of this incident after the election primarily, I would have thought they did separate after the release of Mind Games, and were not to reunite until February 75. They did make the time in 73 before Mind Games came out to attend the Watergate hearings. The only thing I'd say about this book is maybe they should have given equal billing to Yoko a bit more, because it's credited to John Lennon and Yoko here, but obviously it's just John's face on the cover. And I have a feeling in 50 years' time, people will be talking of John and Yoko as a package, as artists, as feminists, all the things they did together and apart. And Yoko, her reputation is sky high at the moment in the art world, having just had an exhibition for 6 months at the Tate Modern in London. So I think that's a minor criticism. At some stage they're going to have to, I think they should embrace Yoko fully. I mean, for example, her album Feeling the Space is not even pictured, the album sleeve is not even pictured in this book, which is a shame, because this is actually the same musicians as Mind Games, and you can have fun spotting Dave Spinoza, Ken Asher, Arthur Jenkins Jr., Gordon Edwards on the horseback, and John Lennon there. Jack Douglas is also here on the right there. That's Jack Douglas. So and Ken Asher and Sneaky Pete. So this is signed by Yoko when I met her in Budapest in '98, by the way. And this Approximately Infinite Universe, also signed by Yoko. Interesting, the gatefold picture is from that session, the post-election night session. So interesting that she chose to put that on the album, given that that was just the day after that terrible thing happened, and She did take a while to decide what to do about it, but she says in the book, drastic situations call for drastic solutions. So that's why she sent John off to LA. But it's quite fun to compare Feeding the Space to Mind Games. It's similar in concept, and even the back cover sort of quite similar. So anyway, this book is not that expensively priced. I've seen it on Amazon for £32 or $52. That's not the list price, but I've seen it going for that. I think that's pretty good value. It's a decent size. It's the archetypal coffee table book. You can dip in, dip out, come back to it and enjoy it. And thank you, Simon Hilton, again for sending it to me, and well done on editing it. Superb book. Thank you for watching. See you next time.